great also to have the company of Benedict Spence, Conservative commentator. I just went to him earlier than you expected. Got off your phone. Benedict Spence is here. I'm delighted to say so much to talk about today. We've got so much to get through, and I do want to hear from you, in particular about Donald Trump saying the US will take over the Gaza Strip, permanently relocate Palestinians to either Egypt or Jordan. They've said they don't want them, by the way, and turn Gaza from a hellhole, he says, into the Riviera of the Middle East. I wonder if that would involve, I don't know, a Trump casino and a hotel. I wonder if that would be included. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word TALK and your message to 87222. You can send us a message on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost £1, standard network rate message. Welcome your thoughts also on Chagos Islands and 18 billion quid if you're on my money. And indeed, this extraordinary press conference we've had from the families of the victims of the Nottingham killer, Valdo Calacane, who were basically just saying, you know, this is an absolute catastrophic failure that this man was ever on the streets. And he was clearly a dangerous, violent, paranoid schizophrenic, and he was freed, not taking his medicine. They knew he wasn't taking his medication, and he was nevertheless still out on the streets. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because will any lessons be learnt from this big review and a subsequent inquiry? I think a lot of us fear it won't be. Now, of course, another major press conference that took place during our show yesterday was the one about Lucy Letby. An international panel of experts concluded that Lucy Letby, the NHS nurse convicted of killing 7 babies and attempting murder of another 7 babies in her care at the Countess of Chester Hospital. They say she is a victim of a terrible miscarriage of justice, that she did not murder a single baby in her care. They claim that actually all of the babies' deaths and collapses can be explained with other medical explanations. We're going to be talking to Dr. Xu Li, a retired professor, about his findings. He was one of the leading medical experts who spoke at that press conference yesterday. Also, we're going to be talking about the latest madness involving migrants to this country. It turns out councils using your and my money, they don't have any money that isn't your or my money, they've spent millions to host new arrivals, including, please put down your cup of tea at the moment, because you will splutter and make a mess, asylum seekers and refugees being given taxpayer-funded PlayStations and DJing lessons. I kid you not. That is coming up a little bit later. I mean, really defies belief. It really does. Benedict Spence is still with me. Benedict, so much to talk about. We talked a lot about Israel. Let's come back to that briefly, because there's lots of other topics I do want to get to today. Do we think that Trump's plan for the US to take over Gaza is a sort of strategy, a negotiating tactic, like what he's been doing with tariffs and the threats to countries like Colombia and Canada and Mexico? Is this a serious proposition? Do you think this is more off the cuff, even though it was a scripted statement that he made? Do you think he actually thinks he can achieve this? And do you think there's any chance whatsoever of Arab nations agreeing to any of it?
I think it's a strategy to put pressure on Arab nations and also to put pressure on Israel to a less degree.
Well, how does it put pressure on Israel?
Basically,
I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu was standing there like the cat who got the cream, quite understandably.
No, he wasn't, not for all of it. He didn't look particularly happy when they said that we're going to own it, we're going to develop it, because this is a serious part of the right of his political coalition, is that actually there are a lot of Israelis who do actually kind of feel as though maybe Israel should just annex Gaza and deal with it. There are people like that in the Israeli government. We shouldn't forget that. Yeah. And how is he going to be able to spin that to his political allies, who he relies on to keep him in power, Netanyahu? Not very easily. He doesn't want that. It would be seen as a bit of a political loss if Israel sort of invested all of that time and effort into trying to clear Gaza of Hamas, only to then be strong-armed by the US into signing a ceasefire, and then the US comes in and goes, and now we're going to have this. That wouldn't go down particularly well, I don't think. So there is, in terms of getting Israel to agree to certain security guarantees, but it's mainly about first and foremost about getting Arab nations to agree to the funding of this, because they want to sign it, and I think it's also probably to do with getting Egypt in particular to potentially consider freeing up more land in the Sinai.
I mean, giving up some of their territory,
which they're not using. There's nothing there. That's why the Israelis, after they captured it, were more than happy to give it back, because it's just a desert. But if you have enough money, you can use it to develop. But Egypt can't really use it for anything that it wants. It's a bit of a political basket case as well. But the idea presumably would be, this idea has been floated, that a patch of land adjoining Gaza on the sea would be freed up, and it wouldn't be owned by the Palestinians. It would probably be leased by somebody like the UAE, who would then give it to the local authorities in Gaza, provided that those local authorities authorities were that way politically inclined and not Hamas.
I have a funny feeling that the people in Hamas, seems to me to organised criminals and terrorists, are not going to want to agree to this.
Which is why the Israelis are going to keep on droning them and killing them even though there's a ceasefire. Just like they're doing to Hezbollah in Lebanon, even though there is a ceasefire. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, but when Hezbollah breaches the terms of the ceasefire, then they're entitled to retaliate.
Hezbollah hasn't done that, though. But the Israelis, under the terms of the ceasefire, are allowed to continue doing that. That's the thing with all of these ceasefire agreements. It's not a unilateral peace deal. It's Israel going, we've won, and we will now do what we want, and the others going, yeah, you will. That's basically what these are.
And this is the thing. A lot of people are pointing out, this is realpolitik. This is emperor's new clothes stuff. This is Donald Trump pointing out two-state solution is not going to happen. We've got to resolve this. It uses up way too much. It is infecting Western politics. We have got 5 MPs effectively for Gaza right now in our own parliament. I was very unimpressed with David Lammy. When he said, with his reaction to this morning, I mean, shocker. I'm like, I imagine his mother feels the same way. But as a foreign secretary talking about, Palestinians who need to be on their homeland, or they claiming Israel's their homeland. So sorry. By the way, there are plenty of Arabs, huge population of Arabs living in Israel, perfectly peaceably, and supporting IDF forces being in Gaza to protect them. By the way, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, is this a game changer? Though, is someone actually saying, at long last, that two-state solution thing ain't going to happen? And also, here's the thing. Billions have been poured into Gaza. The IDF pulled out they pulled out 20 years ago. What did Hamas choose to do with all that money? Did they help the people build lovely hospitals? Well, they built hospitals to go above tunnels. They built weaponry and missiles, and they terrorized their own people, and then they terrorized Israel. They could have built the Riviera on the Med, and they chose not to do it. Love to hear your thoughts on that. Let's talk about also this press conference. It's still ongoing, actually, and it's the families of the victims of the Nottingham killer, Valdo Calacane. I still remember vividly being on air that morning in June 2023, and we couldn't work out, the reports were coming through that the whole of Nottingham city centre had been cordoned off by the police. What on earth was going on? Was it a terror attack? What was it? And then reports gradually started coming through, and the horrific stabbing. 2 19-year-old students, that's Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Coomer, and also 65-year-old caretaker Ian Coates. Their parents and Ian Coates' son, and many of us in the families have been basically fighting for justice ever since. Particularly outrageous, I think, the Valdo Calacane, because he was a paranoid schizophrenic, was charged eventually with manslaughter and not with murder, whereas he was charged with attempted murder of 3 others. So how was he able, minutes later, to be capable of his actions? But that basically, they've got a new report, which the families have fought tooth and nail to actually get published in full, lays out bare what they call the catastrophic failure by not just NHS mental health care professionals, but also the police and authorities as well, that of so-called care in the community. Didn't involve care. He was in the community when he shouldn't have been. He'd been repeatedly sectioned again and again over the year before this awful killing. He's now not behind bars in a secure hospital, but basically pointing out that everything that could go wrong did go wrong. They knew that he was a danger, but they kept letting him go free. He didn't like using needles, so they didn't make him take long-term medication. So he basically didn't go take medication for ages at a time, weeks and weeks, months at a time. The police, when there was a warrant for his arrest after one violent incident, didn't go looking for him. Even his own family members, we know from that documentary last year, were concerned that he was a risk to himself and others. Again, to me, we're in Axel Rudiger territory. Different scenario, not necessarily mentally ill, but the same issue where someone is known to be a terrible danger to others. And nothing is done.
Yeah, and the ease with which they're able to slip through the net, people like this, sort of suggests, and the fact that there's a lack of real agitation from authorities to actually get on top of this, suggests that these are not, in fact, isolated incidents, that actually it's sort of par for the course, and that we're fortunate in many ways that the number of incidents that then lead to people dying are as small as they are. We all, I'd say this much, those of us who live in big cities are becoming increasingly aware. It's really hard to miss it. The number of what are clearly very, very mentally ill people.
Oh, every single day.
Everywhere. Yeah. Around the cities, London, Norwich,
on the streets,
recently,
public
Liverpool,
transport.
Manchester. It is very ubiquitous now. You just expect it, and people just keep their eyes down, because why would you want to engage
cross the
with
other
something
side of the
like
pavement?
Yeah, absolutely.
And hope it's not you.
They have become a common part of our daily existence in big cities. This is going to keep happening. again, if authorities are not in fact made to get on top of this, but for that there does need to be a sea change, again, in how we approach mental illness in this country. Actually, people who are depressed or have ADHD or something like that, yes, that's important, but it's not as important as the people who hear voices in their heads telling them to kill people or see things that aren't there. That's much more important, and we need secure facilities with trained therapists to deal with those people.
But often you can't give someone therapy. Sometimes medication, people can be safe if they're on medication, but if they don't take their medication, then they're unsafe. And if you're not actually seeing them take their medication, they're unsafe. But this is it, balancing the needs of the many against the individual rights of an individual with serious mental health problems.
My point is...
And it seems that authorities routinely get it wrong.
My point is they shouldn't be out there. They should be in secure facilities. And as much as people might think, oh my God, it's terrible, it's going to be like the Victorian Bedlam, it is as much to do with their safety. Well, it doesn't have to be. Most countries actually are able to run asylums perfectly well. But it's about their safety first and foremost, because actually you're not preserving their safety if you're letting them go out and be on the streets either.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Barnaby's mother, Emma Webber, she told the press conference this morning that the miscarriage of justice, she says, would have been brushed under the carpet were it not for the family's campaigning, and says that Callacane serves no punishment for his crimes. He resides as a resident in a hospital. He receives income from the state. He says he got away with murder. The father of Grace O'Malley Kuma, Sanjoy, he said that he would be asking the Health Secretary to order a mental health trust to hold individual doctors responsible for the failures in his daughter's killer's care. And I think that would be very, very important actually in future. You have to be responsible. I've always said this about, say, like, when parole boards are letting a paedophile out. They say, no, we think it's safe. OK, fine. So you're happy for him to babysit your kids for the weekend, are you? OK, fine. Put your money where your mouth is. Let him into your house. You go out, off you go. I mean, genuinely. So you don't want him to babysit your kids. Oh, so you don't think he's safe. Oh, good to know. But you're free to let him onto the streets with other people's kids because you don't live in that street. There really does have to be veering on the side of caution in a lot of these circumstances rather than the other way around, does there not? Look, I do want to hear your thoughts on this because it is outrageous. And again, if it were not for these families, and they're quite right, if it were not for them actually campaigning on this, if it were not for them and their ability to, they're very, very, articulate, they're very, they've been very proactive in this. If it wasn't for them, none of this would be learned. And will lessons be learnt? And again, I just have no faith in lessons being learned, and I don't know why all of these authorities don't want to learn lessons and don't understand that spending money to prevent it would make more sense. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Let's also talk about Lucy Letby. Experts yesterday gave a press conference saying, look, we're world experts. We've come to this completely, we haven't followed the Lucy Letby case. Some of them, from abroad didn't know anything about it. They looked into the case of all the babies who she is convicted, not alleged, convicted of murdering or attempting to murder. And they say they believe she didn't murder a single baby. They say there is a medical explanation or a failing by a medical professional explanation for every single one of those deaths and those collapses of babies, and that she is the victim of a terrible miscarriage of justice. We've got the likes of David Davis, we've got campaigner Peter Hitchens, former cabinet minister Nadine Dorries saying that she is a victim of a terrible miscarriage of justice. What do you make of it?
I think it's a lot for medical experts to say definitively she didn't do it. I think that's overstepping the bounds. I think it's fair to say there are reasonable explanations for all of this, but actually to sort of sit there and say she absolutely didn't do it, I think is, given that they are in fact not police officers and they are not necessarily looking at all of the evidence involved, I don't think that they can make that step. It's clearly a very complex case. I think that's become clear, even as it was ongoing, that it was a lot more complex.
Well, it was months long trial. By the way, weeks of deliberations by the jury. They didn't just go after an hour, they reckon she's guilty.
No, but what
she was found not guilty in a number of the cases.
What I would say, though, is one of the things that did come out from this press conference is that, I can't remember the name of which one it was, it said if this was a hospital in my country, it would have been closed. Actually, I thought that was more key. Even if she is found to be not guilty, not guilty of these things, someone somebody
guilty.
should be going to prison.
Now that's the key thing. I do not personally think there is an issue with this case. I'm trusting the evidence. Things that so many people who did sit in on that court case for months and months and months say, look, a lot of the things that are raised as here's a bit of evidence that questions that, therefore she must be not guilty. But actually, these are often tiny parts of a much bigger case in each individual circle. They went through each child one by one. This wasn't like, oh well, she was. Lots of people on the internet seem to think that, well, she was the only nurse on duty, it must have been her. That literally wasn't a part of the case. That wasn't the case. Okay, but. There are so many people questioning this. I think faith in the law and faith in the justice system is so important. I think that the Criminal Cases Review Commission should look at this case and there should be a full review and go through it again, because if she is innocent, even of one of those babies' deaths, okay, even if it's not all, if it's one of them, then babies were dying unnecessarily in the care of this hospital. We need to know why. We need to stop it from happening again. I can't imagine how distressing it is for the parents. We know some of the parents have been speaking about how just awful it is to hear these claims about the woman who was convicted of killing their baby. They lost newborn babies that the medical professionals say shouldn't have died.
It's
it
really
was
tricky.
your kid?
From what evidence that I have read, and I've not read everything about this case, but I would sort of tend to agree with what the jury get their result. However, as we say, the sheer number of people, babies who died, and she was not convicted for all of the deaths, let's remember there were others, it would also be in the best interests of other people for there to be a scapegoat.
I think,
And so I think actually that it is perfectly reasonable to reopen and have a look at this, because something, be it even if she is a mass murderer, even if she is a serial killer, there were clearly massive safeguarding failings that went on at this hospital that should have picked up after 3 or 4 babies maybe, rather than 15, 16, 17.
It should be instant after wherever there's ever even one extra death that you instantly go in and go, right, is there a problem? I appreciate your thoughts on this. Do get in touch, 0344 499 1000. I also want to touch briefly on this mass shooting in Sweden yesterday. 11 people dead. At one point, they said they had a man in custody. The police, in a press conference, and then we were told that he had actually shot himself. We understand that there's they believe it was a 35-year-old man. No official information is out. It would appear, judging by what is around on it, that it was a 34-year-old native Swede, a man who was not known to the police, who had a gun license. He had an automatic weapon. Went through this. Was a converted school. It's now an adult education centre, largely teaching foreign language students to a huge number of migrants who arrived in Sweden, and went door by classroom by classroom shooting people. Now, many people are also injured as well. It's the biggest worst mass shooting in Sweden's history. What I found really fascinating about this, though, was Sweden has had the most extraordinary upsurge in violence, a huge amount of gangland violence. It is now, the rape capital of Europe, having been pretty much the safest place in Europe, full stop, on any crime. There is now a bomb or grenade attack most days in major Swedish cities, where of course there used to be none at all. And this was noted in BBC, ITV, Sky and other new broadcasting reports talk about, there has been this upsurge in violence in recent years in Sweden. At no point mentioning, who's that by? Now, it may well be the case, we don't know what the motive is in this case. It may be a mental health issue. It may be someone feeling that they were retaliating against the immigrant issue. It's a very, very live political issue in Sweden. We literally don't know right now. I'm not saying that. But to mention the massive rise in gangland extreme violence in Sweden, and not mention that it is almost entirely, according to Swedish official statistics, down to immigrant populations from certain parts of the world. It's not the Norwegians doing it, by the way. Not the Norwegian immigrants doing it. I think is actually. Let's use their phrase. Disinformation. It's deliberately misleading people.
It is.
Swedes haven't suddenly gone, I think I'll just start grenading people, and I think there'll be mass rape of women on the streets. They didn't start suddenly to do that. So what's changed?
Yeah, strangely enough, Sweden has actually gone through a very long process of becoming a lot less violent over the centuries, to then have a massive uptick in such a short space of time. It is bizarre. Hiding this sort of thing, trying to hide this sort of thing, as authorities do in this country, doesn't help situations. If you're not honest with people, that's how you fuel the reactionary
And
tendencies.
it's not a conspiracy theory. That's how you feel people knowing you're lying to them.
Yeah, and that is what fuels... The Guardian has been talking for the best part of 30 years that the far right is on the march. Well, that's how you get it. I'm sorry. It's not rocket science. If you would like racist political parties, racist movements, violent, forced repatriation, this is stuff that is going to come to Europe. I suspect we will get both forced repatriation and I suspect also pogroms in Europe in the next couple of decades. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen because authorities were not prepared to admit you need to forcibly integrate people if they're going to stay here, and if not, you need to be honest about what's going on with people. They will not be taken for fools indefinitely.
People can see it with their own eyes. I mean, the statistic, again, one of the few countries that actually does have some actual official statistics. It's incredible, it really is.